Oh,
And we're live. Hold on, let me check and make sure.
yeah.
Yep. We are live.
I think we are live. All right. Thank you so much, Trina. I am so excited to be interviewing.
And we're live. Hold on, let me check and make sure.
Yeah.
Yep. We are live. Let me turn down the volume. It is live. Okay, go on.
You're going to chop this apart, right? Like to chop off the beginning, I hope.
You know it's live because we're making mistakes. If it weren't live, this all would be edited out.
Okay, good. All right, so we're done laughing and giggling for about a second and a half, and then we'll start giggling again. I am Julie Spencer, and I am interviewing author Heather B. Moore, and she goes by several pen names, H.B. Moore, and we just love her as Heather. So Heather, how do you want us to address you?
Heather is just perfect and just fine.
Wonderful.
Not master of the universe or anything like that.
No.
We're not worthy.
I don't want to be the master.
Okay, we also are joined with Dr. Trina Boice, who is a very prolific author in her own right. So, but Trina and I are kind of here to talk to Heather, and Heather has a really cool new book coming out, or maybe it's already live, I think. But let's get to know her as a person first before we talk about her awesome new book. So, Heather, could you maybe just take a few minutes and tell us about yourself and maybe if you have any unique stories about how you started your career as an author and what you've been doing since and all the books that you've got?
Answer all of that in 25 words or less.
Okay, that will not happen. There's a reason I write novels. Not that I necessarily talk a lot, but go on and on. But I have a hard time without editing just to making something very concise. That's why I love editing as such a great feature we have in writing nowadays, especially on the computer. So I grew up as a reader. I grew up in Utah, going to the library, especially during the summers. I check out 12 books at a time. That was the limit on your library card. Not that I always read all of them in the 2 weeks, but I read a lot of them. So really, I grew up as a bookworm, and I did really like English and creative writing in high school, but I failed my AP English exam essay section, and so I thought this is a sign from the universe, and I'm not going to major in English, so I didn't. And anyway, so fast forward, I was I was probably in my late 20s, and my grandmother asked me to start helping her with her personal history. So every week I would ask her questions and write things down when I visited her. And it kind of gave me a story idea, but I thought, well, maybe I'll just write like a short story. And I hadn't ever written anything like independent as far as just a story, right? Unless it was homework. So I wrote a story, and it kept getting longer and longer, and it turned into a whole book. And I was 30 by now, and I had no idea what to do with it. So I started, this is really before we had the internet, but we didn't have things. There were internet searches, but you had to dial up. I don't even know. You could call it Wi-Fi. What was it even called? Just
Prodigy
internet service. But so I went to our local library, which is a really small library. I lived in a kind of a smaller town, and they had a writer's market there. So I would look up the publishers. I would Xerox, back in the days we called it Xerox off pages of publishers, and then that's who I'd submit to.
I did that exact same thing. That's so funny. And for those of you who are watching that don't know what she's talking about, it's an actual book, or they have it online now, but a book where you could go and find publishers in a niche or literary agents in a specific niche. Yeah, total old school.
Yeah, and they used to say, send us a query letter and your first 3 chapters. So then you're doing a lot of printing and a lot of
snail mail, no less.
Yes.
Yeah, I did the same thing.
And then you'd wait 6 to 8 weeks. Sometimes they'd never reply. Sometimes they would, and they'd send you a letter back and say you're rejected, because I was always rejected. But I did. So anyway, so I had finished that first book, and I kept thinking, should I just keep going? And that's always a question. Am I a good writer? Is this worth it? Do I even have any talent? So I started going to the League of Utah Writers, and they met at the Provo Library, and that was once a month. And I ended up getting into a critique group. And the critique group really, I would really say it was like going back to college for me. Like learning how to write when you're specifically writing a book is a lot different than just doing homework for a class.
Very true.
And trying to pay attention, because you're not just breaking down a book, you're actually the one writing it.
Yeah.
So that first book, I remember I got a rejection, and now I understand it was probably a form rejection. It was handwritten just on, so my query letter came back, but on the bottom was a handwritten note. But
Did you keep all your rejection letters?
I think I might still have them. I don't know. I'd have to.
I kept all of mine in a binder because I
Yeah.
said to myself, someday
Yeah.
I'm going to show this binder when I'm speaking to wannabe authors and say, keep persisting. It'll pay off for sure.
Yeah. And Shannon Hale, I've heard that she's done that in school presentations, is she has hers like taped together and laminated into a huge line. So she has like 200. So she unrolls it and it goes flying down the aisle.
That's a great visual aid.
But yeah, so this handwritten note just said, you are a good writer, and then but this story will not fit with our publishing company. So that's pretty form rejection, but you are a good writer, I just clung to that. I thought, okay, one person that I don't know there is a good writer. And they had read, I don't know how much they had read of the manuscript, because they didn't used to send back manuscripts or the chapters he sent. So that was really where my journey got started. I was 30 years old. I had little kids at home. I wrote that first book was kind of the book I think a lot of authors end up writing, a book that you just pour everything into, which ends up being too much. Mm-hmm. But you're learning as you write. And so I wrote a mystery after that, and I wrote kind of a ghost story historical after that. And then I wrote a historical novel on a scripture character. And that was, so actually my first book is what ended up getting published. And so I don't know, that was, a 3-year journey at least of writing and submitting and writing and submitting. So you can do it if you're over 30 or 40 or whatever.
Did you just say that the first book you ever wrote was the one who got published, or that one that was 3 or 4 books? So
it was actually my 4th book I wrote is the first one that was published.
Okay, cool. And who was your publishing company originally? What was the first publishing company?
So my first publisher was Covenant Communications, and I am still with them 20 years later.
Oh, wow.
That's awesome.
So I've written for other publishers as well. I wrote for Thomas and Mercer for about 4 years, and I did a thriller series with them, and they're great. I loved working with them. When my series was over, they gave me some book ideas, and so I wrote one of them, and it ended up getting rejected. And so we kind of brainstormed some more, and I wrote another one, and it was really, this was about, I'm trying to remember what year it was. It's been several years, but this is when serial killer novels were a huge trend. You may not even know this, but they're a huge trend, and they're selling like crazy. And I just could not write something that dark, even though I read them, because sometimes you're just in the mood for something creepy. But I just felt like that wasn't the direction I wanted to take my career, because I was still writing historical fiction on scripture characters, and I was doing some inspirational nonfiction with Covenant, which I loved doing. And I loved writing thrillers and adventures, but I didn't want to go too far into the psychological side. Like mine were more like Indiana Jones type novels. Yeah. Adventures.
Well, Heather, you just dropped a really golden nugget for writers who want to be published authors, and that is be open-minded to other genres, willing to explore, but be very strategic in the career that you want to actually create for yourself. And Julie is being very humble as the host and the interviewer, but Julie is also prolific, but the two of you create worlds and people and, you know, fiction, and all my stuff is nonfiction. So I'm so fascinated by the fiction mindset. Like, how, Heather, what inspires you to create all of these people and these worlds and the setting? I mean, all of that. How do you get your inspiration? How do you think of all those stories?
Well, I think like Julie being also a novelist, it can just come from sometimes I'm reading another book and it's not necessarily, I get the same, like a similar storyline. It's just like, oh, wow. You know, she went to this grocery store, she passed by this field and it had like pumpkins that were misshapen, and it like kind of just sparks an idea of, well, why are they misshapen? You know, so you're always like questioning things. And I remember listening to Mary Higgins Clark speak in person. It was really cool. One time she came out for a writers conference in Utah, and she said that her and her writers group, they wouldn't necessarily critique each other's work, you know, because they're all, you know, the New York Times bestseller and international mega millions.
Nice group to hang out with.
Yeah. So, but they would get together and they would just brainstorm story ideas, which is fascinating because that can really just stimulate your ideas. And she said, what we would do is we would just say, what if this happened? What if you're in the house alone and the toilet flushes?
Oh yeah, that would freak me out.
Well, I don't know. Do you have a faulty plumbing system, or do you have an intruder that couldn't wait?
You know, I love that tip. What I think you've just answered the question that I've had for years. How do fiction writers come up with all of this stuff? The mindset is what if, whereas I think my nonfiction brain is how to do something, you know? So what if is such a great tip for a writer wanting to create. I love that.
I don't know if Julie does this, but you know, people talk about writer's block, but honestly, if you just say, okay, I'm kind of stuck in this scene, then you say, well, what if, you can even pick three options. What if this happened, or what if this happened? And then you say, okay, I'll write this one first. And then sometimes it ends up being just fine. And 90% of the time it is. And sometimes you're like, no, I'm going to try writing this other way. You know, that, you know, she does this instead, or he goes here instead. And, or the phone rings and it's, you know, throws a wrench in the whole plot of who's on the other line. So but it really is, it's just kind of experimenting and just saying, you know, it's just a story. I can always revise and come back and change it later. Don't intimidate yourself. Don't shut down. Just keep writing.
Yeah. And actually, I was just listening to, I'm not going to say who it was that's the video, because I'm going to say that I'm disagreeing with everything. I was just listening to a podcast that was like tips on how to improve your writing. And it was like every single thing that he said was just the opposite of what I do. So I must be a very strange writer that, you know, like, look, I edit as I go constantly. I stop and do research in the middle of what I'm.
I do both of those. Yeah.
Yeah. And he was like, oh yeah, never stop and do research. Just keep writing and write sprints and set a timer so that you stop. I'm like, whoa. If I set a timer and stop writing, that's like stopping the flow.
Yeah.
Of my creativity. I'm like, just my idea of a vacation is for everybody else to just go away and let me have my computer and quiet and maybe my kitten and just let me type and for hours and just leave me alone so that I can type. If you start talking to me or a timer goes off, I would be like, no, that just messed me up 100%.
Well, and not that, you know, I agree 100% with this guy, but I can see where he's coming from. Like some people are I just can't get started. And he's saying, well, why don't you just set a timer and just write and don't worry about anything else. Just see what comes out. You know, I can see that working for some people that are really struggling, but once you're halfway into that first novel and you keep going, like it really does become a passion and almost an addiction. Like you would rather, instead of, you know, catching up on whatever the newest series is, you're like, no, I'm just going to write tonight instead of, you know, keeping up with everyone else watching the series.
Cracks me up when people talk about, you know, binge watching Netflix or something. I'm like, how do you even have time? Oh, that's right. Because I write for 70 billion.
Yeah. And then you get the question back, right? How do you have time to write? And you're like,
well, I don't even have a Netflix account. So that's the first.
Well, but do you guys watch stuff on Netflix to get inspiration? for your
Mm-mm.
stories?
I have, so this is my, okay, so not what, this is my problem with the serial television or whatever series. I feel like that you like the season 1, and sometimes they'll end with a cliffhanger if they know they have a season 2 coming. Like, I feel like this story should be wrapped up, but then it keeps going. And so all they're doing is they're just taking splinter plots or splinter characters, and they're now creating those, which is fine. But I've kind of fallen in love with that main character, group. And then I'm like, I get like a little bit disenchanted. And I think it's just me, though. It's not that a series that has 8 seasons isn't great. It's just that maybe because I write in different genres, and my books, 300 pages, your book is done, 320 pages, it's done. And so I'm always looking for the ending arc and not going on and on and on.
And especially if you're a fiction writer who writes romance or love stories, it's kind of like once they fall in love,
Yeah,
that's kind of, I don't want to say that's the end of the story, because it's really actually that's like the beginning of life, is when you fall in love and get married, and then your life goes all in a handbasket, and that's when life begins. But as a romance story, life ends at, oh, they're finally in love and they're together.
and you don't want to hear about their marital problems. You don't want to know that you don't want to know that they broke up or their engagement fell through. Like you want this little, because I agree, romance is about falling in love along with a character. And so you want to fall in love with a character, but you don't want to see a breakup or the problems, or if it's a he said she said situation. You just want to fall in love with the next character in the next book.
Yeah, I mean, unless you write love stories. I have a tendency to write love story, and I think actually, Heather, you probably do also somewhat.
Mm-hmm.
Or you'll like your scripture-based stories are not necessarily romance.
They're not really a romance arc where you're not getting. So sometimes there's romance in it, but then it's not necessarily you wait till the end of the book for the first kiss or the marriage proposal.
Right. Yeah. And that's a lot of times in my stories, because they're love stories, the big kiss and often the wedding even sometimes happens a third of the way into the book. And then like the big challenges start. Like the one that I've got coming out in November, Hidden Swan, is like she has an eating disorder. And so getting married is like one of the first things that happens about a third of the way into the book. And then he realizes just how severe her eating disorder.
And I think that's really compelling. And I actually, one of my favorite genres to read, which I guess I kind of do write it if I like you consider like I have some biblical novels like on Ruth and Esther the Queen. I mean, those are more women's fiction, just because it's silly to say women's fiction, men can read it, but it's centered around a female character. But like you said, there's romance in it, but really the overall arc is like, your character with the eating disorder, and now her husband is grappling with new wife that has some things that he has to help her through.
Yeah, I mean, in sickness and in health is tested right away. Yeah, but we have gotten so far off track from your new book. Do you have a copy? I actually have, my copy is on Kindle, so I can't really hold it up and go,
I do.
Here's my new book. Tell
us. I literally put this here yesterday. So this is my book that comes out on September 7th. So whenever you're watching 2021, in case you're watching.
That's a great cover and a great title.
So it's called The Slow March of Light. And a lot of people say, well, what does the title mean? So the main character, his name is Bob and Nama, and he is a true person. He actually just passed away on August 9th at the age of 86. Oh. So he recently passed away.
Right? Did you interview him a few?
Yeah. So all 2020, I was doing interviews with him. He read the manuscript and he got a paperback advanced reader copy. But he, so the story is about his service in the U.S. military, and he was sent to West Germany, and then he was asked to go undercover into East Germany, and he got turned in and by another double agent and was arrested and put into Soviet prison for 6 months. So this is a long, see, I told you, it takes me a long time. So the Slow March of Light is how he told time when he would watch the light move across his prison cell.
Oh.
Because he was just in a small prison cell, and he had a small window that was 15 feet above him. And then when I saw the cover and it has a little yellow bird on it, I said, well, it's a pretty color, but there's no birds in my book. So, but we were to the stage where I don't think it had been copy edited yet, or it might have been in copy editing. I said, can I add a bird to my book? So now there's some bird imagery and bird references in the book that go with the cover. So that was kind of fun to be able to do. But this book I do a lot of historical fiction. So this is another historical novel, but the difference between this and anything else I've done is that Baba Nama was still alive when I wrote it. And I was able to get personal interviews with him. But the other intimidating thing was that he was then going to read the book, and I was a little bit nervous about that, but he ended up saying I loved it and didn't really give me any feedback except for one typo correction where I had put the initial of his father wrong. And I was, anything else, Bob? Is that it? Okay.
Wow. And did
This
you
is like a movie in the making?
Yeah. Did you interview him to get like the story, or was it part of his journals, or how did you get the?
So he did not keep journals. So he did go through quite a bit of trauma in prison. And he had only recently, in recent years, had told his entire story to his family. His wife knew some bits and pieces, but his parents never knew that he was even undercover, because the Army assigned another person to write to his family as if he was just serving and fine. And so he had kept a lot of stuff just, buried inside for a really long time. But he did. So when he finally told his wife the whole story, she wrote it down like kind of as a short personal history. So they sent that to me, which was helpful because then I could refer to it when I needed to, like as far as chronological order. And then I would, for several months, I just emailed them almost every week as I was working on the manuscript. And I'd ask him questions that I ran across, and then he'd answer them. Then I'd go back and tweak or fix what he had answered.
How did you get involved in this project to begin with?
That was my question. How did you know?
So it's kind of interesting. So and I'm sure this happens to publishers a lot, is his family contacted my publisher and said, hey, our dad did all these, had this incredible story he shared with us. And we think it would make a great book. So of course, a lot of times the buck stops there because they probably get a lot of these type of submissions. But for whatever reason, this worked its way to the Shadow Mountain imprint. And I had actually the week before had pitched a book to Shadow Mountain, and I was under a 2-book contract with them. So I had written a book called The Paper Daughters of Chinatown, and that was already in production. So then now it was time for me to pitch my next book idea. So I had pitched a book and I was really excited about it. But the committee was kind of like, it's okay. Do you have anything else? And so during this time, they contacted me with this story idea. And I thought, well, if you guys already like it and have already basically approved it, that saves me a lot of time from finding other book ideas. And because preparing a pitch can take a while, and doing the research to make sure, the book is something that the publisher would be interested in. So, I mean, I was kind of intimidated, but I just thought it was an amazing story. His son had sent over just a few paragraphs kind of detailing the basics. And so that's how it ended up. And I don't know, there could have been like 5 other authors they asked that said no. So I might have been like number 6.
Or number 1.
Who knows? I don't know. I didn't dare ask him that.
Oh, that's the dream of every author, is have the publisher say, will you write this book?
Because you feel like they're already supporting it when they do that.
Exactly.
You've got a lot of similar books. You mentioned the China. Why am I messing up?
Oh, it's a long title. The Paper Daughters of Chinatown.
And then you've got another one that was it your great grandmother or something? In fact, that one's free right now, right?
Yeah. So I have a book that's free from today through September 5th, and it's called Condemning Not, and it's based on the true story of my 10th great grandmother that was accused of witchcraft in Salem. Yeah. And so, and there's a lot of stories, a lot of, there's plays, there's movies about the same witch trials, but I decided to write, I just felt like it's a really personal story for me to tell in my own way. There's You can give 10 authors the same book idea and all the books will come out different. So this is my rendition of my ancestor, Susanna, and she was one of the ones, and she was actually in her early 70s when she was sent to jail or prison.
See, and that's how I think that I chose you for that book, is because you've done all these others that are similar and very poignant. And, you know, I just think that your talent, I certainly wouldn't, I would be very surprised if they chose you 5th or 6th. I think you were the number 1 choice.
Well, you're an award-winning author. You know, earlier you were sharing how, am I good enough? And you've received multiple awards over the years and have had an incredibly successful career. At what point did you think, you know, I am pretty good. I think I can do this. Was it that very first book?
I think you go through phases. Like you go through phases where like some good reviews or some compliments or an award just really does kind of sustain you. And you go through other ones where you see that bad review or you hear something snarky and you're like, well, you know, maybe I'm not that great of a writer, but I was better than the other stories, or it was just the story that struck them, not necessarily my writing, because the story was, you know, compelling. So I do have a bit of a crutch writing historical fiction because it makes it marketable, where people are like, oh, well, if this is a true story, then you know, maybe it has more value than a beach read. And in fact, when I started, I've written beach reads and they are so fun to write and I love them. And I feel like I'm almost on a vacation writing them, and I still try to bring, you know, value, but you do have kind of the uppity reader that they'll put more intrinsic value into maybe a historical novel, or, you know, nonfiction, of course, that's always very considered, you know, worth your money, I guess.
Yeah.
But yeah, but I remember when my first book did come out and I started doing book signings for it, and and writing that second book, it was part of a series, and that was probably my hardest book to write, because first of all, I knew I had a good feeling, well, not a good feeling, I guess a general idea that this book would be published. It was second in the series, and the first in the series was doing okay. So I felt like almost like someone was looking over my shoulder, like I'm typing a word thinking, you know, they're like, this sentence is going to be in a finished book. Like you don't have that before you're published. Before you're published, you can just edit and you're just, you know, you're so just happy in your naivete. But it's just, I don't know, it's a different feeling. But it's also kind of a pressure too, is you feel like now I'm being expected. Like this book has to be better than my first one, because you always see those reviews like, you know, I didn't like this book as much as our first one. And you see that all the time. And I'm sure Julie, and I don't know if Trina, if you've experienced that or not with nonfiction, or I like this book better than this author's book. So you always feel like every book has to be a little bit better, or at least different enough that they're not gonna say, well, the last 2 books I read of hers aren't that great, so I'm just not, so they, you know, then you lose a fan.
Yeah. I've had I've had so much extreme from one, like I was ready to give up a while back. I felt like I wasn't getting anywhere. And then I got a couple of reviews that were like all in caps that said, never stop writing. And I love everything you write. And almost like it was like talking directly to me, not just, you know, Julie's books are great, but Julie, your books are great. That's kind of how it felt. And then I have the opposite extreme. The one, I'll never forget, this heading of the review says trash, clean trash, but still trash. I'm like, thank you. That just makes me feel really good. I mean, like, would you say that about somebody's child? You know, like, here's this beautiful baby. Oh, that is the ugliest baby I've ever seen. You just wouldn't say that to people. So it was, so the opposite. I love those reviews that say I would read anything she writes. That just makes me feel good. So yeah,
I know a lot of authors who don't. I know a lot of authors who refuse to read reviews because they're afraid of what's going to be said. But I always say, you know, you can learn if they write a negative review, then you're like, okay, I need to work on that for the next one.
Yeah.
But so Heather,
I mean,
it sounds like you do read your reviews.
Yeah, I mean, so kind of what I do is more of a marketing thing I do now. Is most authors that say they don't, they actually do read their reviews, but they know they have a limit. So they might read like the first few reviews that are coming out, and then they're like, okay, you know, I feel like, you know, this book is on its way, and but I do have some author friends that they really do shut down. Like they've gotten to the point where they'll read some negative reviews and then they're not writing for a few days because it really can be crippling. But this is why I tell people, maybe my best advice of this video event is when you see a bad review and you let that bad review, and this is different than what you're saying, Trina. There are some critical reviews that can help, you know, as far as the writing or you know, like for future, like, oh, you know, this author always starts the book with a dream. You're like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize that. I do. And then you think, okay, I should not start every book with a dream or whatever it is. But if you give more weight to a critical review, isn't that kind of discounting all your positive reviews and all the readers that loved your book? You're like, you know what, you guys don't matter. You love my book, but you don't matter. I don't care what you say. I'm just going to focus on these 2 1-star reviews I have that are nestled in the middle of 150 reviews. So like, which is more fair to yourself and to your audience? You know, so I remember Jeff Savage once saying, he was in my critique group for years and years, and he said, your book is not going to be for everybody, but people will pick it up and maybe they hate fantasy, but they're going to read your fantasy novel for whatever reason, and then they're going to write a 1-star review on it. So, you know, any book, you can find your favorite book anywhere, and there's going to be negative reviews on it.
Yes.
That's absolutely true. And you're shelling out some really great tips, I think, for anybody who's watching this who isn't a published author. Well, what am I saying? Or even is a published author. And I know you speak at a lot of writers' conferences. And so what have you found to be some of the biggest struggles that authors have in either writing or marketing or creating their career or branding themselves? Are there common threads that you see amongst all of your attendees when you're presenting?
You would be really, really surprised. I mean, you can have authors out there that have movie deals, that have, you know, multiple books on the New York Times bestseller list. And really the most crippling thing is fear. And there is a book by Stephen Pressfield called The War of Art. And I probably, anytime I have a chance, I tell people to read that. There are so many things that can hold us back from writing that next book or turning in that next book or changing genres. And so I, in my personal life, my personal writing life, I try to have a plan A, a plan B, and a plan C with every manuscript I write. So this manuscript just got rejected by my agent. So what's my plan B? Do I submit to a publisher on my own that I don't need an agent for? Maybe. And if that doesn't work, you know, I give myself a deadline. I'll do this for 6 months. And this takes out the emotion of it, because writing really is a business, unfortunately. But you put your heart and emotion into the book, but then the sales are a business. So then my plan C is, so I submitted for 6 months to small publishers and it didn't get picked up. So my plan C is I'm going to indie publish this book. But I'm always looking, like you mentioned earlier, there might be an opportunity in an anthology. You're co-writing a series with a group of people. I mean, there's a lot of opportunities you just want to really stay open-minded to. Sometimes I've joined a box set just because the other authors in the box set are writing to the same market as I am.
Yeah.
And so I just, figure out a random story, and I write for that box set, and then it gets promoted. And it's a very slow way to get new readers, but I think it really can make a difference down the road.
I'm really glad that you're speaking to the point of marketability, because I was actually in a meeting yesterday with a publisher. We were talking about all of these, you call them very naive, writers who were presenting this book that they've written and spent so much time and love in. And yet it could be a great book, but if the publisher doesn't see profitability, even if it's a great book, he's not going to take it. And how now more and more publishers are making decisions well, they always have based on
Right.
profitability, but looking at the author as a whole, what kind of marketing platform do you have? How are you going to help market this book? Because it does come down to dollars and cents, and also timing. Maybe like you talked about, the serial killer books was a trend. There are trends. So maybe your story might not be right for right now, but maybe a future trend will pick that up and scoop it up with sales. But it is important as a writer to look at the business of writing, because that's how it works in the world.
Yeah. And Heather, what was your first genre? Like, okay, so backing up a second, that when I first started writing, I thought I was writing in a particular genre. It turned out I was writing in a completely different genre. And then I ended up changing one of my stories to become a young adult sports romance instead of the rock star stuff that I'd been writing that was more, an adult, it was new adult genre, pretty more mature. And all of a sudden I wrote this young adult novel and it took off. And I would not have found my little special niche if I hadn't switched genres. So when you first, started publishing, was there a time when you switched genres or tried something different and it took your career in a different direction? Or have you always kind of known that you had all these different genres in you?
Well, I had written 3 different genres before my 4th genre was the one that was published. But the advice that I was getting from different authors was you and the publisher covenant is they want you to stay in that same genre. But now with social, back then there's no social media, there's no Facebook, there's no, so now I can put out a romance, a thriller, a historical, all in the same year, and I'm pushing it to my same audience. But a publisher has a much narrow target market, and they're sending out catalogs. They're known for certain types of books. So at Covenant, I stayed in scripture fiction for 5 books, which was really 5 years because I was doing a book a year for them. But I just wanted to write a bigger scale, more of a thriller, and it actually has religion in it as well. It's based on finding the Queen of Sheba's tomb, modern day tomb hunters. So it's called Finding Sheba if you're interested.
The first time I met you was when I had you sign that book for me.
Yeah, so that was that was my 10-year book, because I wrote that manuscript and it took me a while and several months, and I started submitting to contests, and I finally got an agent with that book. And this was I think it was right in 2008 timeframe when we had the big recession, and a lot of publishers, agents were losing their jobs, publishers were closing their doors or scaling down. And so the agent took almost a year to do edits and to get her notes back to me for whatever reason. But and the first thing she said was cut 100 pages.
Wow. So
that was my job. And then, yeah, she gave me some ideas of take this character out and this, this whatever trajectory out. And then so she sold it, or she didn't sell it, but she started shopping it. And about 18 months into shopping, she's like, it gets to committee a lot, but they're saying Heather B. Moore, HB Moore is not a big enough name, because if they're going to put out a thriller writer, they need to send it out to all these people, which means they literally said this, a 500,000 print run. And I'm like, oh, that's fine with me. I can deal with that. But no, they felt like my book wouldn't sell that much, so they couldn't put it up against their other thriller authors. So anyway, but meanwhile, even though my agent was shopping, I was going to writers' conferences and I was meeting with every editor I could and pitching this book. And if I got interest, I would say, hey, agent, can you submit to this person? So at the end of 3 years, I was at another conference and I met with another, just really randomly, I met with another agent. I was telling about my projects, and I just felt like maybe it was time to switch, because I felt so every agent, and this agent, she was amazing. There's definitely a tadpole in her big fish pond, but every agent has their personal contacts and personal connections. And I felt like she had kind of ran the gamut. It had been even submitted more than once to like Penguin, to different editors there. And so, so I ended up meeting this other agent and really liking her. And I sent her one of my other books and she ended up turning out down. So I was thinking, should I switch agents, you know, kind of thing. So it was kind of a test thing. Then I read this, and this is, so Kindle was just coming out and just being like a thing and people were making money on it. And I read this article about this all-star named, oh, I'm going to say his name wrong. It was Stonehouse Inc. was the name of the publisher. And okay, his name was Aaron Patterson. I just remembered. Okay. So there's an article in him and on this like Kindle news letter from Amazon. And it talked about how his thrillers just went crazy. Like #1. I mean, if you're a #1 on Amazon, you're selling 10,000 books a day. It's crazy money. But in turn, he was also using his imprint to republish thriller writers that had gotten their rights back to books or rights back to publish, you know, like a publisher folded or whatever. So then I'm like, I'm going to email this guy. So I reach out to him and he ends up publishing it.
Okay.
So very small press in Idaho, but it's doing amazing things. And so this kind of cut ties, and it didn't cut ties with my agent as in, it was just taking the book off of her plate. So we're actually still in contact sometimes, and she's an amazing lady. So this book had been out for about 5 or 6 months. And this is when, if you guys have heard of Bookbub, this is when Bookbub was just starting to like become a thing. And so I had heard about it, kind of the buzz about it. So I said, it was $300 to get on their newsletter list. You have to be accepted. So I talked to the publisher and I said, can we submit this? It's $300. And he said, well, I don't have marketing money, but I will discount the book. And you had to discount your book, 99-cent ebook. And if you pay for it, then I'll discount it. So I ended up getting a Bookbub deal. And it sold like 5,000 copies in a week, like 99-cent copies, right? So, and I had maybe 50 reviews. So it's getting like traction on Amazon, it's getting noticed. And so it's like all the things just come together at the same time. Is Kindle selling, Bookbub is doing these amazing deals, and Amazon just started some imprints. And this is a lot of people don't realize this, is Amazon has its own traditionally published imprints. And one of them was called Thomas and Mercer. So I got an email one day to my little author account, and it was from an editor at Thomas and Mercer. And she said, I've read your book and I loved it. We would love to republish it. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And I was like, oh, this is like a game changer, just random from the universe. I had nothing. I mean, you have something to do with it because I've been, you know, I wrote the book and I did, you know, all this stuff, but it's been like 4 years since I've written the book. So I said, oh my gosh, I think I need an agent. Oh, and I need my rights back. But because the publisher was small, is they had uploaded through KDP. So she probably just thought, oh, it's a self-published book. So I sent her an email. I'm very interested. I need to get my rights back from my publisher. And that same like 10 minutes, I sent an email to this agent I had met like 2 years ago that had turned down my other books. And I said, explained to her what was happening. And I also emailed a couple other agents too. And so within 3 days, I had my rights back and I had a new agent and I had a deal in the making. So it was just like the perfect storm, I guess. But so then that book ended up coming out, and that book I think really was a game changer for my career. It sold well. It sold like 40,000 copies, and I ended up getting 3 more book deals with them. And it kind of just gave me a little bit more, I think, street credibility, because I had been with one publisher for so long, you know, publishing, you know, wonderful stories, but they were kind of the quiet spiritual stories. And it just gave me that confidence to now I can do more than one, you know, I can do more than one thing with more than one publisher, and we can all play nice in the sandbox, and it's a win-win for everybody.
Well, I love that. And I'm looking at the clock and we are just about out of time. But I think all of that you just reinforced in my mind a lesson that I always share with people, and that is put those fishing poles out there, because you never know what's going to bite. I mean, you were working it and doing all of the things. You were putting yourself out there, and sometimes the universe all comes together and blesses you with an opportunity like that. But you gotta be brave and toss out those fishing poles. All right, Julie, to stay with our time, you want to ask Heather one last short question?
Well, actually, I'm kind of going to say that what she just answered was kind of a perfect way to sum things up. It was beautiful, and I don't think that we can, add much more to that except just where can readers find you, Heather? Because I know I've known you for a few years, and I love your books, and I just want others to have the opportunity to read them too. So where can readers find you?
So just remember the B in my name, Heather B. Moore or HB Moore. There is another author named Heather Moore. It's not me. But hbmoore.com. I'm on Facebook, Heather B. Moore, fans of Heather B. Moore. I'm on Instagram and Twitter. So just Google and I think I'll pop up.
And I'm also putting the description or in the description below all of your details, as well as where to find Julie and a few places where you can find me and my stuff too.
Awesome.
Yeah. Thank you so much. That was great.
Thank you so much for being with us, both of you. And I really appreciate that. And I look forward to seeing you both. And if you're watching this video, there is a free book right now through Heather. You give us the name one more time. If
Condemning Not.
Condemning Not. And today it is the 2nd of September 2021. So when is it done? 5th?
September 5th. It's free through September 5th. But if you join one of my pages, our newsletter or whatever, I'm always sending out deals. So
cool. All right. Well, we appreciate that.
And Julie too. Julie has a free gift for everybody.
Yeah. On my website, authorjuliespencer.com. You can get an exclusive book that you can't get anywhere else, and it is called Honorary Prince, and it goes along with my Royal Family Saga, but it's a special book you can't get anywhere else, and you can download it free from my website when we join my email newsletter. So yeah, free gift. So lots of
and I've got a free gift for you too. So look down in that description and you can snag all the deets.
Okay.
All right.
Have a great day,
everyone.
I kept looking over here to see if anybody was posting any live comments. I didn't see any questions come in, but when this is on YouTube permanently, please subscribe to this channel, comment down below, like it. You know the drill. Thank you so much for spending time with us.
All right.
Bye for now.
Thank you.